I still remember the exact sound the front door made that night. A soft click. Harmless. Ordinary. The kind of sound that usually means comfort. That you're home. That the day is over. I came home earlier than usual. A logistics meeting had been canceled last minute, and for once traffic cooperated. I even picked up Thai food from the place Sarah loves, green curry, extra basil. I remember feeling oddly proud of myself for thinking ahead. I had no idea I was walking into something that would quietly divide my life into before and after. The first thing I noticed wasn't a voice. It was a coat. A man's coat. Dark gray wool, tailored, expensive. Draped casually over one of our dining chairs like it belonged there. Not folded. Not temporary. Just placed. My brain tried to solve it logically. Maybe maintenance? Maybe a neighbor? Maybe one of her cousins? But maintenance guys don't wear tailored wool coats. And they definitely don't leave them that comfortably behind. Then I heard laughter. Low, male, relaxed. Not the polite kind of laugh you give when you're in someone else's house. The kind you give when you feel at home. I stepped further inside. Eric Stone, Sarah's boss. He was sitting on my couch, leaning back, tie loosened, top button undone, jacket off, like someone who had already been there a while, like someone who had settled in. On the kitchen counter behind him were 2 wine glasses. Not untouched, not recently poured. Half empty. There was a bottle open between them. It wasn't a business meeting. Not at 8:30 at night. Not with the lights dimmed. Not with his tie off. Sarah came around the corner from the kitchen barefoot, holding the bottle of wine like she'd been about to refill his glass. When she saw me, she didn't jump. She didn't panic. She looked irritated. Daniel? You're home early. Not, oh. Not, I didn't know. Just early. Eric stood slowly, smooth and composed, offering me that polished executive smile I'd seen in corporate holiday photos. Daniel, right? We were just going over projections. Sarah's been instrumental on the Henderson account. Instrumental. In my house. With his coat off. I set the takeout bag down carefully, making sure my hands didn't shake. Projections require wine now? I asked. My voice surprised me. Calm. Controlled. Sarah's jaw tightened immediately. And then it happened. She didn't deny anything. She didn't explain. She attacked. Oh my God, Daniel. Seriously? She snapped. He's my boss. We're working on a major deal. Not everything is about you. The shift was immediate. From suspicious situation to me being the problem. I didn't say it was about me, I replied. You didn't have to. That look on your face? You're jealous. Jealous. Eric raised his hands slightly like he was mediating a corporate dispute. Hey, I don't want to cause tension. Maybe I should head out. But he didn't move right away. He lingered, watching. Sarah crossed her arms. You're being paranoid. Eric is mentoring me. Do you know how many women would K*LL for this opportunity? And instead of being supportive, you're acting insecure. Insecure. The word hit differently than jealous. Jealous implied emotion. Insecure implied weakness. I glanced at the wine glasses again. At the soft music playing from our speaker, not something we usually played during work discussions. At the candle on the coffee table. Candle. Career growth doesn't usually involve private evening meetings at our house, I said quietly. She laughed. Actually laughed. You're unbelievable. This is why I don't tell you everything about my job. You twist it. You always assume the worst. Eric finally grabbed his coat. Sarah, we can reschedule tomorrow at the office, he said smoothly, though he still didn't quite look me in the eye. Daniel, good seeing you. Good seeing you. Like we ran into each other at a grocery store. I stepped aside so he could pass. As he walked by, I caught the faint scent of his cologne. Not strong, but familiar, because I'd smelled it before. On one of Sarah's blouses 2 weeks earlier. She'd said it was from the elevator at work. The door closed behind him. Silence flooded the room. Sarah turned on me instantly. You embarrassed me. Embarrassed you? Yes, you made it weird. You always do this when it comes to my career. You can't stand that I'm moving up. I stared at her. I had supported every late night, every networking dinner, every team-building event. I handled the house, the bills, the repairs. But now I was threatened by her success? You think this is about your promotion? I asked. I think this is about your ego. She asterisk T back. You're int asterisk mitigated by Eric. By his position. By the fact that he respects me. Respects her. With wine. In my house. At night. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter. Disillusionment. You're projecting, she continued, her tone sharpening. And honestly, it's exhausting. Exhausting. I looked around our living room, the framed wedding photo above the fireplace, the couch we picked out together, the house we spent years building. And for the first time in 10 years, it felt slightly unfamiliar. Like I was a guest in it. Fine, I said finally. Next time, just give me a heads up. There won't be a next time if you're going to act like this, she replied without hesitation. That sentence lingered, because of how easily it came out. Like this wasn't new. Like this conversation had already been rehearsed in her head. That night we barely spoke. She went upstairs early, said she had a headache. I stayed downstairs, staring at the half-empty wine bottle, at the second glass she hadn't cleared away, at the faint indentation on the couch cushion where he'd been sitting. Around midnight, I walked upstairs. She was asleep or pretending to be. Her phone was face down on the nightstand. A new habit. I stood there longer than I should have, just watching her breathe, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the woman who had just called me insecure in my own home. Around 2 a.m. Staring at the ceiling, I replayed the scene over and over. The coat, the wine, the candle, her irritation, the way Eric looked comfortable. And something unsettled me more than all of it. She hadn't looked surprised to see me. She had looked interrupted. And that was when the realization started forming, slow, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. This wasn't the first red flag. It was just the first one I couldn't rationalize away. After that night, I told myself I was overreacting. That's what you do when you're not ready for the alternative. I went to work the next morning pretending everything was normal. Answered emails, took calls, reviewed shipment schedules. But underneath it all, something kept replaying in my head. Not just Eric sitting on my couch. It was Sarah's tone, the speed at which she shifted blame, the way she made me feel small for noticing. That stuck more than the wine. That week, I started remembering things I'd brushed off before, like how her schedule had changed. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, strategic almost. She began mentioning evening project discussions at least twice a week. At first, they were at the office. Then they became off-site meetings. Then, occasionally, last-minute strategy sessions. I'd ask simple questions. Who's going? The team. Which team? You don't know them. The answers got shorter over time. More defensive. She also started dressing differently. Not drastically, just subtly. More fitted dresses on regular workdays. Heels instead of flats. The kind of perfume she usually saved for date nights. When I'd compliment her, she'd shrug. It's a professional environment, Daniel. Appearance matters. It always had. But not like that. Then there was the gym. She began encouraging me to go more often. You've been stressed lately. You should get back into a routine. You should meet up with Chris more. You've been isolating. At first, I thought she was being supportive. Then I noticed the timing. She suggested those things most often on nights she had late meetings. Go. I'll be working anyway. Space. She kept using that word. I just need space to focus. I need space to grow. I need space that isn't defined by us. Defined by us. Like marriage was confinement. Her phone changed too. It was never face down before. Now it always was. Notifications turned off. Password changed. When I casually picked it up once to check the time, she reached for it instantly. Can you not? Not angrily. Just sharply. Private. She said she valued privacy. I didn't argue. Because technically she was right. But marriage used to mean transparency. at least between us. Then came the comparisons. They started subtly. Eric thinks long-term strategy is everything. Eric built his career from nothing. Eric doesn't let emotions interfere with ambition. At first, they sounded like workplace admiration. Then they began to feel like contrasts, like unspoken sentences finishing themselves. Eric is driven. Eric is decisive. Eric understands. I caught myself adjusting, working later, talking more about expansion plans, trying unconsciously to close a gap I hadn't realized existed. One night, about 3 weeks after he'd been in our house, she came home late again. I was sitting on the couch. She walked in smiling faintly at something on her phone. When she saw me, she locked it immediately. "How was the meeting?" I asked. "Productive. With the Henderson Group." I nodded. The same account Eric had mentioned in my living room. "What time did it end?" She paused. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm asking. You don't trust me." There it was again. The reversal. Any question became accusation. Any discomfort became insecurity. And slowly I started questioning myself. Was I becoming paranoid? Was this what supportive husbands didn't do? Maybe I was threatened. Maybe I was projecting. The gaslighting wasn't loud. It was subtle, cumulative. Every time I raised a concern, she reframed it as my flaw. "You're jealous. You're insecure. You're controlling. You don't support me." And the more she said it, the more I started monitoring my own reactions. I stopped asking questions. I stopped commenting on her schedule. I even apologized once for making things tense. She accepted it easily. Too easily. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Vacations, holidays, random selfies in the kitchen. We used to lean into each other, physically. Now, even in bed, there was distance. Not dramatic, just inches. Enough to feel. She started going to bed later than me. Said she had emails to finish. Sometimes I'd wake up at 1 a.m. and her side would be empty. I'd hear faint typing downstairs, or once soft laughter. When I came down that night, she was on the patio. Phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, she ended the call. "Work," she said before I asked. I didn't ask. That was the part that scared me most. Not that things felt wrong, but that I was starting to adapt to wrong. Like my nervous system was normalizing it. There were moments when she seemed almost irritated by my presence. If I came home early again, she'd sigh lightly. "If I'd known you'd be back already." She never finished that sentence. But she didn't need to. And then there was the way she said his name. Eric. Not my boss. Not Mr. Stone. Eric. Soft. Casual. Familiar. One evening I made dinner reservations. Tried to reconnect. She canceled last minute. "Eric needs me to review something." I stared at her. "Tonight. It's important." I asked her once, gently, if there was anything I should be worried about. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. "I can't believe you'd even ask that." And for a second I felt ashamed. Ashamed for doubting. Ashamed for thinking. Ashamed for noticing patterns. But patterns don't disappear because you ignore them. They grow clearer. And slowly, piece by piece, what once looked like isolated incidents began forming a shape. The late nights, the changed password, the comparisons, the defensiveness, the subtle emotional withdrawal. I wasn't imagining it. I was assembling it. And the more I replayed that first night, the coat, the wine, the candle, the more it stopped feeling like coincidence. Felt like continuity, like I hadn't walked into the beginning of something. I'd walked into the middle, and that realization settled into my chest heavier than anger ever could. Because suspicion hurts. But pattern recognition, that's when it starts to feel real. The decisive moment didn't come from instinct. Came from confirmation. For weeks I had been living in that suspended state between doubt and denial. Suspicion is exhausting because it has no edges. It just floats around you. I told myself that if I ever saw something concrete, I'd handle it calmly. I didn't expect how quiet the truth would feel when it finally arrived. It started with the security system. We installed exterior cameras 2 years earlier after a package theft in the neighborhood. I barely checked the footage anymore. It was just background noise, something you forget exists until you need it. One Thursday night, Sarah told me she'd be staying late again. "Budget revisions," she said, not looking up from her phone. I nodded. "Take your time." She left at 6:15. Around 9:40, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. The house felt different lately, less like a shared space, more like a waiting room. On impulse, I opened the security app on my phone. I don't even know why. Maybe I was looking for reassurance. Instead, I found a timestamp, 8:02 p.m. A familiar car pulling into my driveway. Eric's car. I zoomed in. There was no mistake. He parked casually like he'd done it before. He stepped out without hesitation. No knock. He walked straight to the door. At 8:04 p.m., the door opened from inside. Sarah let him in. The lights in the living room were already dimmed. I felt my pulse slow. Not race. Slow. Like my body was processing something irreversible. I kept scrolling through the footage. 10:37 p.m. His car still there. 11:12 p.m. Still there. 12:04 a.m. Still there. He finally left at 12:46 a.m. The next morning, Sarah told me she'd fallen asleep reviewing spreadsheets. I said nothing. That night, I checked previous recordings. The pattern was already there. Not daily, but frequent. Eric arriving around 8. Leaving after midnight. Always on evenings when she told me she had calls or late strategy sessions. Sometimes he parked in the driveway. Sometimes around the corner. But the timing was consistent. Late. Private. Hidden in plain sight. The footage didn't show what happened inside. It didn't need to. The repetition was enough. But confirmation rarely travels alone. 2 days later, I ran into an acquaintance of Sarah's at a local cafe, Megan. Someone from her company. We'd met at a holiday party once. She hesitated when she saw me. The kind of hesitation people make when they know something you don't. "Hey, Daniel," she said carefully. "Hey, how's work?" She forced a smile. "Busy." There was a pause. Then she added, "Sarah's been very dedicated lately." Dedicated. The word felt loaded. I held her gaze. Dedicated how? Another pause. "You know how offices are," she said quietly. "People talk." My chest tightened. "Talk about what?" She exhaled softly, like she regretted even engaging. "About Eric." I didn't interrupt. About how much time they spend together. How he doesn't exactly hide it. Hide it. She looked uncomfortable now. "I probably shouldn't say anything." "Say it," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "There are jokes," she admitted, "about how he prefers working late in calm environments. With someone who understands him. Understands him. My house flashed in my mind. My couch. My kitchen. The dim lights. The wine. Megan looked at me with something close to sympathy. "I thought you knew." That sentence landed harder than anything else. "I thought you knew." As if I was the last one to figure it out. As if it had been visible for a long time. I drove home in silence. Sat in the driveway for several minutes before going inside. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't yell. Instead, I watched. That night, when she said she was reviewing quarterly projections, I checked the cameras again. 8:17 p.m. Eric arrived. This time he brought a bottle with him. They disappeared inside. The house lights dimmed shortly after. I sat in my car 2 blocks away. I don't even remember deciding to drive there. I just found myself parked in darkness, staring at my own home from a distance. It looked peaceful, warm, safe. A house that belonged to a couple, not a stage for betrayal. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. At 11:58 p.m., I watched through the front window as 2 silhouettes crossed the living room. Close. Too close. He didn't leave until after 1 a.m. When Sarah came to bed later, she slid in quietly, careful not to wake me. I kept my breathing steady. Her hand rested briefly on my shoulder. The same hand that had opened the door for him. That was the moment it crystallized. This wasn't emotional confusion. It wasn't a harmless flirtation. It wasn't insecurity on my part. It was deliberate, coordinated, ongoing. He wasn't sneaking in. He was being let in. Repeatedly, comfortably, inside my own home. And the worst part? The house had become part of it. My living room wasn't just furniture anymore. It was a backdrop. My driveway wasn't just pavement. It was an entry point. This wasn't an accidental lapse. It was a pattern executed with confidence. She didn't fear being caught. She assumed I wouldn't look. The evidence wasn't dramatic. There was no single explosive moment. Just timestamps, consistency, silhouettes behind glass, rumors spoken casually over coffee, and the quiet realization that I hadn't walked into something unexpected that first night. I had interrupted something well-established. By the time I turned off the security app, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even angry. I was certain, and certainty is colder than rage. Because once you have it, there's no room left for hope. I didn't confront her right away, not because I doubted what I saw, but because something inside me needed to confirm one last thing, whether I was completely alone in this. I told myself that if I explained everything calmly, laid out the facts, people would understand. Family would understand. Friends would understand. That's what they're for, right? Support, clarity, reality when yours feels distorted. I started with my older brother, Michael. We met at a bar halfway between our houses. I hadn't seen him in weeks, and when he noticed how tired I looked, he joked about work stress. "It's not work," I said. Then I told him everything. The coat, the wine, the cameras, the rumors, the timestamps. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, I expected anger on my behalf. Outrage. Protective big brother energy. Instead, he leaned back slowly. "Eric Stone?" he asked. "Yeah." He exhaled through his nose. "That's a powerful guy." I blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It means," he said carefully, "he's not some random idiot throwing his life away for a fling. If he's involved, it's strategic." Strategic. I felt something tighten in my jaw. "She's my wife." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not defending it. I'm just saying you need to think bigger." Bigger than what? Bigger than betrayal. Think about what he represents. Connections, stability, influence. I stared at him. "So you're saying this makes sense?" "I'm saying," he replied slowly, "Sarah's ambitious. You've always known that." Ambitious. Like that explained letting another man into our home. "You think this is about ambition?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "Maybe she saw an opportunity." The word hit like a slap. Opportunity. "She's married," I said flatly. "Yeah," he replied. "But marriage doesn't pay executive bonuses." I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's what you think this is?" "I'm trying to be realistic," he said. Realistic. As if loyalty was naive. As if principles were optional. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. The next day I called my mother. If anyone would react with clarity, it would be her. She listened quietly as I explained everything. Long pauses between my sentences. When I finished, she sighed softly. "Daniel," she said, "marriages go through phases. This isn't a phase. You work a lot." I've always worked a lot. Maybe she felt neglected. There it was. Again. Shift. Redirection. "You think I caused this?" "I think," she replied carefully, "that when a woman feels unseen, she looks elsewhere." Unseen. I felt the same cold sensation in my chest I'd felt that first night. "She was seen," I said quietly. "She was supported." Support isn't the same as attention. The implication hung heavy. If she cheated, it was because I failed to notice her enough. I ended the call politely, hung up, sat there staring at my phone. I wasn't asking them to choose sides. I was asking them to acknowledge reality. Instead, I got explanations, context, justifications dressed as wisdom. I tried one more person, our mutual friend Greg. He'd known both of us since college. We met for coffee. I laid everything out. This time I didn't leave out any detail. When I finished, he rubbed his temples. "That's rough," he admitted. "Yeah. But, Eric Stone?" I didn't respond. Greg leaned forward. "You realize what that means socially, right?" "Socially?" "He's connected to half the city's leadership. If this goes public, it's not just about you and Sarah. It becomes complicated. Complicated. Like I was a liability for wanting accountability. So I should stay quiet?" I asked. "I'm saying tread carefully. You don't want to burn bridges you might need." "Bridges?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity finally became clear. I wasn't losing just my wife. I was losing the illusion that people valued integrity over status. Every conversation had the same undertone. Eric is influential. Sarah is ambitious. Think practically. Be realistic. Consider the bigger picture. No one said she was wrong. They said she was strategic. No one condemned him. They acknowledged his power. And slowly, something inside me shifted again. It wasn't heartbreak this time. It was disillusionment. I had believed certain things were stable. Marriage, loyalty, family support. I had believed that if betrayal was obvious enough, people would call it what it was. Instead, they reframed it. "She's thinking long-term. Maybe this is about growth. You don't want to overreact." Overreact. As if allowing another man into my home repeatedly was minor. As if humiliation required moderation. One evening, after another conversation that ended with, "You need to reflect on your role," I sat alone in the living room. The same living room, the same couch, the same walls, and I realized something unsettling. If Sarah had left me for someone unemployed, broke, unstable, people would call it reckless. But because it was Eric Stone, it was pragmatic. That's when it became clear. For many people, loyalty is admirable. But status is persuasive. Money softens judgment. Power reframes betrayal into advancement. And suddenly, I wasn't just confronting infidelity. I was confronting a worldview where I was the lesser option. Not morally, but economically, socially, strategically. That realization hurt more than the affair itself. Because affairs can end. But the understanding that some people measure worth in leverage instead of character, that lingers. By the time I drove home that night, something inside me had gone quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just recalibrated. I stopped expecting validation, stopped expecting outrage, stopped expecting anyone to fight for what I thought was obvious. If I wanted dignity, I would have to define it myself. And that was the second betrayal. Not Sarah's, but the realization that many people would rather align with influence than with truth. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. If I stayed in this marriage, I wouldn't just be competing with another man. I'd be competing with what he represented. And that's a battle you lose long before it begins. The divorce itself was quieter than I expected. No screaming matches. No dramatic ultimatums. Just paperwork. Signatures where vows used to be. When I finally confronted Sarah with the footage, she didn't deny it. That almost hurt more than if she had. She just stared at the timestamps on my phone like she was reviewing a spreadsheet. "You went through the cameras?" she asked. "Yes." There was no apology. Just calculation. "You didn't trust me." I almost laughed. Trust had become a P*N in her vocabulary. Within weeks, lawyers handled what used to be ours. Assets divided. Accounts separated. The house where everything had happened, became a negotiation point. In the end, I sold it. I didn't want walls that held those memories. I didn't want to sit in a living room that had been used as a backdrop for something deliberate and repeated. Packing it up felt surreal. 10 years of marriage condensed into labeled boxes. Wedding photos wrapped in newspaper. Furniture tagged for sale. I left the city 2 months later. No big announcement. No dramatic farewell. Just a quiet transfer of my work responsibilities and a one-way flight to another state where no one knew my name or my history. People assumed I was escaping heartbreak. They were wrong. I wasn't running from pain. I was running from narrative. From the subtle way people would always see me as the man whose wife upgraded. That word followed me even in silence. Upgrade. As if marriage was a subscription tier. In the new city, I started over professionally. I'd spent years managing logistics for other companies, coordinating shipments, solving supply chain problems, building networks that benefited executives who barely knew my name. This time, I built something for myself. A small logistics consulting firm at first. Just me and a rented office space that smelled faintly like industrial cleaner. I worked obsessively, 14-hour days, 7 days a week, not fueled by rage, not even by revenge, by clarity. For the first time in years, every outcome depended entirely on me. No shifting blame, no gaslighting, no comparisons. If I failed, it was mine. If I succeeded, it was mine. There was something stabilizing about that. The first year was brutal. Cash flow inconsistent. Clients skeptical. I slept on a cheap mattress in a studio apartment and ate more takeout than I cared to admit. But slowly, contracts grew. Word spread. I wasn't flashy. I was reliable, consistent, disciplined. 2 years in, I hired my first employee. By year 3, we expanded into a larger office. By year 5, I wasn't just consulting. I was operating a full-scale logistics startup with regional contracts. The growth wasn't explosive. It was steady, deliberate, calculated. Very different from the impulsive narrative that had destroyed my marriage. Money came eventually, more than I'd ever made before. But what mattered more was independence. No one could suggest I lacked ambition. No one could imply I wasn't enough. And strangely, the anger I thought would fuel me never fully arrived. What replaced it was colder. A quiet determination never to rely on someone else's validation again. Success stopped being about proving something to Sarah. It became about ensuring I would never sit across from someone who saw me as replaceable. The more the company grew, the more guarded I became personally. I dated casually at first. Nothing serious. I noticed how quickly I evaluated people now. Not for beauty, not for charm, for integrity, for consistency, for how they handled small truths. If someone deflected responsibility even slightly, I pulled back. If someone compared me to another man, even jokingly, I withdrew. I wasn't bitter. I was careful. There's a difference. Years passed. The company expanded into multiple states. I moved into a home I purchased outright. Not as a symbol, not as a statement, just as a choice. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the man who sat in his driveway watching silhouettes through a window. He felt distant now. Not weaker, just less informed. I used to believe stability came from partnership. Now I understood it came from self-reliance first. That shift changed everything. People often assume transformation is loud, dramatic. Mine wasn't. It was incremental. One contract signed. One risk taken. One boundary enforced. One quiet night where I realized I hadn't thought about Sarah all day. Then 2 days. Then weeks. Her name stopped triggering emotion. It became data. Past variable. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would mention her in passing. I never asked. Never followed up. Never checked social media. Detachment wasn't forced. It was earned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man she chose had status, influence, immediate power. I chose something slower, harder, mine. And over time, the quiet rebuild became something larger than the original structure. I didn't chase visibility, but influence found me anyway, not because of who I was connected to, but because of what I built. 5 years after I left, I stood in the office of my now thriving company, looking out over a floor of employees working under a system I created. There was no applause, no dramatic soundtrack, just steady movement, predictable growth, control. And for the first time since that night with the coat on the chair, I felt something solid again. Not pride, not triumph, stability. I had lost a marriage, lost a home, lost illusions about loyalty and status. But I had gained something far more durable, self-sufficiency, and that realization didn't come with fireworks. It came with a quiet understanding. No one would ever again decide my worth by comparing me to someone else's position. Because this time, the position was entirely my own. I heard about them 5 years later. Not from gossip I chased, just a passing comment at a business event. Eric's company had been hit with a financial scandal. Investors pulled out. He lost his position almost overnight. And just like that, the power that made him so untouchable vanished. What surprised me wasn't his fall. It was what followed. Sarah didn't stay. The relationship that once looked so strategic dissolved quietly. No dramatic loyalty. No grand defense. Just distance. I was told she'd called it the biggest mistake of her life. That she underestimated what she gave up for what looked bigger at the time. When I heard it, I waited for satisfaction. For some sense of justice. It didn't come. All I felt was neutrality. Her regret didn't repair anything. His downfall didn't restore anything. It simply confirmed what I already understood. Relationships built on status rarely survive the loss of it. By then, their story had nothing to do with me. The real victory wasn't watching them fall. It was realizing I no longer cared. I had built something stable: career, home, reputation. And somewhere along the way, I met someone different. She valued quiet strength over titles, consistency over flash. She never compared, never shifted blame. When something bothered her, she said it plainly. For the first time in years, my home felt safe again. Not because it was bigger or better, but because trust lived there. Sarah and Eric became a chapter, not a wound. And I understood something clearly. Success isn't replacing the people who leave. It's reaching a place where their decisions no longer define your future.